Hi everyone. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about outcome evaluations and then some of the pragmatic issues that we encounter in evaluation, how you sort of get around some of those. So if you remember, most people, when they think about a program evaluation, what they're thinking about really is an outcome evaluation. Now, we've talked in class this semester about kind of a number of different kinds of evaluations: a needs assessment, process evaluation, and we have talked about outcome evaluations, but we're gonna do so again today as a review, and then as a way to, like I said, get into some of these pragmatic issues. Remember, an outcome evaluation asks what changed for a community or a client's life in a client's life, or for a group of people as a result of the efforts of a program. And an outcome evaluation is sort of in its purest form the application of all those research methods, skills that we talked about uh, to answer a question about the effectiveness of a program. So when you're thinking about doing an outcome evaluation, you need to identify a dependent variable. Identifying the independent variable is very easy because it's the program, but you need to identify a dependent variable, or more accurately, a range of dependent variables. You need to identify a way to measure all of those dependent variables. You need to think about ethics, right? How are we going to protect confidentiality? How do we ensure that beneficence and justice are sort of the standards that are being met? How are we going to recruit people? We'll talk about that for a few minutes today. How are we going to store data? How are we going to interpret data? And then how are we going to disseminate results? Again, all of that stuff, sort of things that we're going to be thinking about today. So the steps in an outcome evaluation, we're not going to talk about all of these. We'll at least talk about them briefly, but we'll spend a few minutes more on some of them. But assemble stakeholders, sort of determine resources, scope, expertise, develop a theory of the program, identify what's to be measured, establish your methods, which is what I mean when I say determine your sample size, your research design, that kind of thing. Then you actually go out and collect the data. After that, you're interpreting the data, disseminating the results, and then using those results to improve the program. So I'm calling it here reforming the program, but quite honestly, you could call it whatever you want. Evolving the program, improving the program, using findings to to make the program better, that kind of thing. But it's sort of a circular process, right? So let's talk about stakeholders first. And like I said, the first step to a good, useful program evaluation is assembling really a diverse group of stakeholders. So who's who counts as a stakeholder? Well, anyone with any kind of an interest in a program. Certainly clients, certainly staff and administrators, certainly people who are part of accrediting agencies or funding bodies. Sometimes client collaterals, family members, partners, other service workers count as stakeholders. Community members, depending on the nature of the program. And then sometimes staff from programs at higher or lower levels of care also count as stakeholders. Now let's pause for a second. What do I mean by staff from programs at higher or lower levels of care? Well, imagine here's an example. Imagine that you work at an inpatient addictions program. It's a pretty high level of care because inpatient, people who are appropriate for inpatient are typically pretty severe. A lower level of care might be outpatient, right? Uh, um, and so people who progress from outpatient to inpatient are actually getting worse. They're progressing to a higher level of care typically because they're failing. Treatment is failing them. They're not improving, that kind of thing. An even higher level of care than inpatient might be kind of like a restrictive inpatient or jail or prison. So that's sort of even higher. So people who who aren't successful in inpatient, right, may even progress to sort of a higher level of care. So in sort of the parlance or the nomenclature of the social services world, sometimes you hear spectrum of care, um, and that spectrum of care usually refers to agencies that are kind of least restrictive to most restrictive. But so why do we engage with people from those kinds of programs? Well, oftentimes the staff know each other because they have to communicate about clients, or they're at least aware of the fact that their programs are adjacent to each other on kind of a severity spectrum. So engaging with including staff on in your group of stakeholders is often useful to do as well. Now, obviously, engaging stakeholders is easier said than done, right? You've got to find, people have to find time, they have to find interest. They, serving as sort of in an advisory capacity like this is often it's a volunteer kind of thing. So it's tough to get buy-in, and that's one of kind of the attendant challenges of doing a program evaluation, is really keeping stakeholders kind of engaged. So after you've assembled though this body of people, it's important to determine what resources you have and what the expertise of the group is. Program evaluations, especially good ones, are expensive, and they're also really time consuming. And so someone on the group of stakeholders has to have kind of a working knowledge of research methods and have access to measures and assessments, and knowledge of research designs, maybe some knowledge about statistics, that kind of thing. Certainly one of the things that people do when they're asked to do program evaluations is they partner with a local university. Um, there are sort of outreach extension programs, and certainly social work departments in schools of social work of any size. Oftentimes what it is some people do is consult on program evaluations. And then of course there are organizations that do program evaluation kind of professionally. I worked for one of these in the past, actually at a couple of different points, and they do really good work, and they're really expensive because you're buying a lot of someone's time for a very long time, and so they are pretty resource intensive. One of the things that you're sort of looking at when you're putting together a program evaluation, it's sort of the amount of resources you're given sort of alludes to how invested an agency is in that program evaluation. So if you're asked to do a program evaluation but not given any resources, there's a problem, and something suggesting that maybe the agency isn't all that interested in what it is the evaluation is going to say. On the other hand, if an agency wants to do a program evaluation and the person in charge of it is given lots of resources, given lots of time, given lots of access, then there's an indication that the agency is pretty interested in what it is the program evaluation is going to find. In some of the work that I've done in the past, I have found that the agency says go and conduct a program evaluation, and there's very few resources. There's sort of very little time allotted, and part of that was because they weren't particularly interested in what the evaluation was going to show, but they also were really unaware of just how expensive and time consuming a program evaluation could be. And so one of the other sort of pragmatic issues that a person is likely to encounter in program evaluation is navigating and negotiating with the agency to figure out exactly what it is they want and what it is they can devote to kind of the implementation of that particular evaluation. Next step. The stakeholders typically put together a program theory, which is a logic model, which is something we spent considerable amount of time doing this semester. After that, you're going to identify what is to be measured. Um, Thinking about what is to be measured, the best way to do that is to think broadly. Um, and there's nothing wrong with measuring a plurality of dependent variables. So not only things like symptoms, but um, other indicators of behavior, of independence, of self-efficacy. All of those things are kind of important to measure. Now, identifying measures, or identifying what you're going to measure, and then finding measures that are actually going to measure those things is a completely different animal. And most good program evaluations use a combination of measures that have already been created. Again, this is why it's useful to partner with an expert. Someone at a university is going to have access to those measures. It also can be useful to create your own measures, particularly if you're looking to measure something that's kind of specific to that program. One of the things that I often think is useful in an outcome evaluation um, is using triangulation. And when we triangulate, we ask not only the client about we ask the client to complete measures, but also typically a family member, a partner, a caregiver, a supervisor, again, depending on what the program is doing. But we ask for kind of multiple sources of data in order to understand the effects of a program. When we're thinking about what's measured, we also kind of get to our next pragmatic issue, which is how are we going to collect and store information? And in my mind, the best kind of the best program evaluations are kind of built into the process of delivering services. Let me give you an example. So one of the mental health clinics that I worked for would when people would come in, I think it was every third visit or fourth visit, they were given um, a, an assessment battery, and that it actually measured mental health symptoms. So it measured things like depression and anxiety and kind of mood, substance use, that kind of thing. For a while, that was done with pencil and paper, and then there were people who would sort of manually input the data. And then after a while, they switched over to using iPads. So and the data were inputted. The data were inputted kind of automatically on the iPad. But this was done as sort of the process of delivering services. And so every third or fourth visit, when someone completed those measures, I, as the clinician, would get a report about how symptoms were changing. We discussed that with the client, modified treatment plans as necessary, and then certainly when treatment ended, at discharge, people were completing assessments again, and we were able to look at pre to post treatment, but also all of the points within treatment at which the measures had been completed. Then, when it came time for evaluations, and when it came time for sort of my performance evaluations and things like that, not only could my supervisor look at number of clients, number of sessions, attendance, that kind of thing, but how much clients were changing as a result of the work that I was doing. Now, sometimes there are program evaluations that are kind of not built into the process of delivering services. They have to be sort of built from the time up, from the ground up. So are you asking clients to complete questionnaires when they come in for treatment, when they leave? If you're using technology, how comfortable are they with technology? Reading level is always a challenge, or always kind of an issue. If you're sending information to clients through the mail or email, that's useful, and it certainly can be done, but how likely are you to get, to get responses, that kind of thing. If you're going to do interviews, right? Sometimes there's an interview component, but that takes more time out of a client's life. And who's going to be doing the interview? Certainly the workers, the program, the frontline staff can't be doing the interviews because you'd risk a social desirability bias. Again, all of these things can be navigated, but there's there are things to kind of consider. So research designs in program evaluation. This slide is about research designs and sample size. And design and sample size really determine the rigor of a particular program evaluation and how useful it's going to be. So let's talk about designs first. As always, and as in social science research, experimental designs with randomization are best. They're not always possible. If you remember, sorry for the weird cut there. I paused it just because the screen wasn't capturing everything. But a pre-test, post-test control group design randomizes people to either one group or another, right? There's a pre-test assessment. One group gets the intervention, and then there's a post-test assessment. This is a great design, and it's a really great design for an evaluation. Big ethical issue, though. This group, right, half your participants, half your sample are not getting the intervention. And that's really hard to navigate in an agency context. You can't just deny services to half the people who are coming through. So the other design that you can use is this isn't a pre-test, post-test control group design, but you can still use one treatment versus some other treatment. And that's also very useful because, again, you can use randomization. Sometimes, though, it's impossible to randomize people, and so you could use a quasi-experimental group design, which, again, remember, quasi-experimental groups don't include randomization. The design that I see probably most commonly in program evaluations, and this is sort of what I would call the minimum, kind of the minimum standard design, is one group pre-test, post-test. So you're following a group of people, you're assessing them at inpatient, assessing them at intake, they're going through the process of the intervention, and then you're assessing them again at discharge. You're able to look at change from pre-test to post-test. Again, this is, sort of technically feasible. It's sort of the minimum, standard. You could add, assessment points or observations out here or out here. You can kind of intersperse X's and O's. All that's good stuff. This is sort of like I said, kind of the minimum, acceptable kind of design. Sample size. In this case, sample size the population is all of the people who have participated in the program. It's not all of the people with that particular problem. Remember, a program evaluation is about the limit of the universe is sort of the program. It's not the entire world. So we're trying to discover. We're trying to make discoveries about the effects of a program. We're not trying to generalize back to the entire population of people. So the good news about program evaluation and sample size is that it actually is possible to recruit everyone or nearly everyone who participates in the program. And again, the evaluations that are sort of best at doing that are evaluations that are built into the process of delivering services. A few minutes ago, I mentioned the mental health clinic that I most recently worked at. Clients were given assessments, every third or fourth session. In that way, we were able to assess every single person who came in. There was no one who was saying no, no one who was, unwilling to participate. But if you're tasked with building kind of an evaluation from the ground up, you've got to contact clients. You've got to figure out when it is they're going to be assessed. If the if the evaluation isn't built into the process of delivering services, a reasonable goal is about 50 to 75% of the people who have participated in the program. That, you're not going to get people who leave early. There are going to be people who say no, and all of that's fine, but you still should be able to get the vast majority of people who are participating in a program. So after you've done all this, the next thing to do is to implement the evaluation, and that's the process of approaching participants, recruiting them, consenting, collecting data, and so when are data provided, what kind of data are provided. Consent and ethics are, of course, a big deal. If someone says no, does that impact their services, their ability to obtain services, their eligibility? Who's going to have access to it, particularly if it's, stakeholders who aren't part of the clinical staff. When are participants completing measures? Are they doing it in the waiting room, before or after? If you're, are you mailing it to them, emailing it to them? This is where things like electronic health records, information management systems, they sometimes call them MISs. This is where all this stuff is kind of useful, but there's a lot of agencies that just don't have these things, these things built. They take time, they take, and they take resources. So after the evaluation is implemented, the next step is to get together and analyze the data. And again, this is where some expertise is required. And we're partnering with someone at a college or university, or a professional evaluator can be useful. And after the data are analyzed, there's always a dissemination period, and that's where the results are disseminated. Most program evaluations take the form of a report, and a report has typically lots of different sections. There's usually, kind of an executive summary, table of contents, an introduction, a description of the stakeholders, a big section on methodology, and then a results and a kind of an application kind of section. The results, the program evaluation report sort of parallels a journal article. Maybe not exactly, but it's pretty similar. Most evaluators, though, in addition to composing a report, are also going to create presentations that presentations are given to other staff, to administrators, to other people who are connected to the agency. The results are talked about in meetings. They could be distributed, in fact sheets, sort of standalone, short snapshot kind of documents. And one of the most important things about disseminating results is to make sure all of these things are consistent. So obviously the report is the most detailed and contains the most information, where maybe a fact sheet sort of contains, the highest level of information. And you've got to make sure that these things are giving a consistent message. And you've got to make sure that people who are talking about results are talking about a message consistently as well. And the reason for that is that, again, think about the purpose of a program evaluation. The point of a program evaluation is to help improve a program, and you want people talking about the same things that need to be improved, so that's actually what's improved. So sort of creating a list of talking points or key points that stakeholders can use to talk about in evaluations findings is usually a good idea. Now, once the report is composed, that does not mean the program evaluator's job is over. All of those stakeholders are kind of responsible for supporting an agency while it's implementing lessons from the program evaluation. So again, going back to sort of the challenge of recruiting a group of stakeholders, this isn't sort of a series of 2 or 3 meetings and then you're done. This is, kind of a year or 2-year long process that requires kind of sustained involvement. This is one of the challenges of doing good evaluations, and why good evaluations are time and resource intensive. So a couple of concluding comments here. Good evaluations point out the good and the bad. They point out what a program does well and where it could improve, and that's why identifying a range of outcomes, a range of dependent variables is always a good idea. Good evaluations also kind of include a diversity of stakeholders. They produce results and insights that are actionable. So not just things that you need to do better, but provide a pathway to actually doing those things better. There are a number of kind of program evaluation models. They're all kind of variations on the same theme that I've presented here. But there's like the CQI model, which is kind of just a continuous quality improvement model. That's where people kind of meet regularly about program evaluations or findings, and they're kind of always working to make practice better. There's the Six Sigma Lean model. That was a Jack Welch GE thing, and that was all kind of about doing more with less and just-in-time kinds of things, using data to form or to inform how programs are run. Kellogg, the cereal people, have a big kind of nonprofit wing, and they advise on program evaluations. CDC makes things available as well. One of my favorite kind of academic evaluators is a guy named Michael Quinn Patton, who has a series of books called Utilization Focused Evaluation. And I find his stuff very useful, and I've used it a lot to guide the work that I was doing. There are others. There's many other kind of program evaluation models, but as I said, they're all kind of variations on essentially the theme that I was talking about here. Review a couple of the challenges. So administrative support is definitely a big challenge, right? Program evaluations are expensive and time consuming, and communicating just how expensive and time consuming they are to administrative types can be a challenge. Engaging clients and engaging staff, particularly those who are not part of that group of stakeholders, also very challenging. Clients may be disinterested, right? They're especially clients who are mandated. Mandated clients were a big part of the population that I worked with. They didn't want to come to treatment in the first place. Ask them to participate in some evaluation stuff, and they're even more resistant because they're reluctant to be there. Even in agencies where clients are there under their own free will, they're there of their own volition, they can be reluctant to engage in a program evaluation. They may be reluctant because they don't want their data to be seen by anyone other than their social worker. They don't have time. They don't understand the value of it. So incentives can be good, but incentives can also kind of cross a line. I have found personally, most clients are willing to engage in a program evaluation most of the time. Let's say 80% of the time, because they see kind of the greater good in mind, and they're interested in kind of giving back. I found this to be the case even in the in the substance abuse work I did, where people are kind of initially reluctant at first. Engaging workers is kind of a whole other challenge. Workers are resistant because they don't see value in program evaluation. They don't want their efforts being scrutinized. They don't want to do anything more than what it is their job description entails. So communicating with staff, with workers, is kind of a big job of a big part of what that group of stakeholders does as well. Of course, administrative types can mandate that workers participate in evaluations, and that's fine. But I always think it's better if workers sort of participate uh, under their own free will and see the benefit of doing program evaluation stuff as well. So it's important that the purpose of the evaluation be communicated to workers at the outset. This isn't people aren't going to be hired and fired based on this. This is about to make our work better, and sort of appealing to that sense of altruism is typically a good strategy for engaging workers. Lastly, how do we utilize evaluation results? This is something I took from Michael Quinn Patton, the man I mentioned a couple of slides ago, who did work on kind of utilization-focused evaluations. And he identified 3 ways to use evaluation results: making judgments, facilitating improvements, and generating knowledge. When we're making judgments, we're basically determining if an investment in a program, right, the investment in setting up or creating a program was worth it. Facilitating improvements, we're determining what can be improved in the process of delivering services. Generating knowledge, we're asking if the lessons from one program, so what we learned at Site A, can be picked up and dropped into Site B somewhere else. Can that program be replicated somewhere else? So I think this sort of 3-question utilization scheme that Patton developed is pretty useful way of kind of thinking about results. Or I'm thinking about how to utilize evaluation results. So I'll leave it there. As always, thank you for watching, and please be in touch with questions.